Nod for over 14 years. He's an industry advisor. He's out in the field speaking with Fortune 100 companies on industry trends and Microsoft technologies. And he's the perfect person to have this discussion with Fergus because, my question with some of these newer technologies is always, well, is this now or is this future? And like, how far in the future is this? And Fergus, you're just so fun. Is this, things that you work on and have fun with, or are these technologies and are these implementations that are being used actively by these Fortune 10, Fortune 100 companies?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, absolutely. A lot of these technologies are in use right now. I think in terms of thinking machines, we're probably not there yet. There's still a lot of research being done from the likes of Microsoft Research, from academics. But all of the pieces that are coming together that I talked about, like the cognitive services in Rory, very much in production right now. Azure Digital Twins, the same. We're getting some really big clients putting entire buildings, entire infrastructures through Azure Digital Twins today, which is really exciting, and like gathering all the data and all the insights. Rayfield, I don't know.
So I'm going to fact check you right there, and so Rayfield, and so when you're talking to executives and they're projecting out their projects for the next 3 to 5 years, what are you seeing?
Well, first I want to go back to Fergus and the brain sensors. I'm really excited to see the follow-up with that one. See if you can actually get Rory working with the brain sensors. So to your question, going back to the industry trends that we're seeing, one of the interesting things that I am seeing, and this kind of goes back to Fergus's comment about Azure Digital Twin, is the use of digital twin to kind of predict like rural planning. So thinking more agriculture, thinking more farm focus. So there are conversations that we're involved with, can't give names, but that are more focused on how can you look at space management when you're planning out large farm implementations, as well as kind of combining that with the use of IoT sensors to manage the behaviors and the patterns that they're seeing from the animals, right? So it gives them an opportunity to combine both the digital twins to say, here's the space, we're planning it this way, as well as say, this is how we'll monitor these large animals and understand the way that their health, their sleep patterns, and their yielding, what their produce that they yield, how that is all correlated. So that's some of the interesting conversations we're having now.
Okay. So Fergus, looks like you're 1 for 1 here. Okay, so he does real work sometimes. No, I'm just playing. I'm just so jealous at the different technologies that you get to work on. Though, with Minecraft, is that a common implementation? And with Azure Digital Twins, are you seeing a lot of that type of integrations?
So I would say Minecraft is probably not selling too well commercially to Fortune 500 companies. What it really is a great tool to experiment with. You don't need any physical setups. It's reproducible. So a lot of academics are using gaming platforms in order to measure the efficiency of the algorithms they're developing, because everyone has access to the games, because you can just sort of download them. You don't need access to physical hardware or like complicated setups. So they're really useful. I don't know of anybody else using Azure Digital Twins for thinking machines. They may be using other graphical data structures. If you're listening to this, and I would encourage you to, because it's been really helpful for us. But really what this is kind of a research and development stepping stone to get to a more useful thinking machine, which might actually be an implementation within one of the bots Veronica was talking about. So maybe in the future, you could send a complicated document like a CV to a bot, and it would actually use some of the applications from thinking machines instead of playing a Minecraft game and completing a challenge. It would actually be reading the CV and drawing conclusions about it that would normally be, would currently need a sort of human level of understanding about what's in the document.
Okay. And so, Rayfield, what type of industries do you see this technology kind of benefiting in the future?
That's a good question. In particular to what Fergus is talking about, I'm thinking about like memory being used in like the health industry, health and life sciences. So this is a great application to essentially, instead of just doing one action or just understanding, like he said, the CSVs that are sent or documentation that's sent, but moving on more towards the conclusions and the next action, going back to the human user and saying that this is the next step based off of things that were a learned habit as opposed to something that was programmed, right? Extreme implications in how that we can enhance our ability to help people in health space, as well as being able to manage documentation and those kind of things that get lost over time with an appropriate mechanism of containing that information. Does that help, Alicia? You follow me?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of work going on in the healthcare space too. So I guess as a data professional, and the global AI community is great for people who are trying to figure out what they don't know. Like what is the next tool? What can I add to my toolkit to make myself more up to speed or more valuable to my employer, or how do I get ahead of the learning curve? So as a newer technology, what are some of the places that you went to kind of learn more information or find other people with similar interests, or maybe a code repo that you like to frequent because there's good code in there to get started?
Yeah, it's a good question. Fergus, do you want me to answer this one first?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so I would say that I would start very similar to what Veronica was saying earlier in the Microsoft Learn space. Between Microsoft Learn and the docs, there are quite a bit of good details around IoT and Azure Digital Twin. I would also suggest using tools like Pluralsight. Again, that's not a plug for Pluralsight, but it's just where I have used in the past to kind of ramp up on the information, as well as literally buying IoT type devices like a Raspberry Pi and playing around with it, right? I think every probably nerd on this call, including myself, has decided to pick up something as far as like a Raspberry Pi to see what we can program in it. And that's easier. Obviously, you have a lot of forums that give you ideas. I think the first thing I did with a Raspberry Pi was set up a gaming system, right? I have a love for old style gaming, so I set up a Raspberry Pi to do that. But I've also seen, and this has happened in our company, where we've taken a Raspberry Pi and used it as a mechanism for sensor devices for measuring temperature in a room, right? A colleague of mine has done that and did a presentation on it that resulted in some work in front of a industry expert. I won't name the company, but the use of that technology allowed for us to expand outside of the temperature in the room. Again, this is something he was playing around with to actually be used by an organization to further their company's platform on sensor-based devices. Fergus?
Yeah, I totally echo what you say. I mean, it does a little bit depend on the way you learn. I'm a total tinkerer, so I have, name and device. I probably have it here somewhere because before the offices shut, I managed to bag all of the tech and take it home with me. But I think
we won't say anything to anyone. Nobody knows.
It's all very well documented, I'm sure. So if that's the way you learn, then great. I would really encourage you to scour GitHub. Microsoft Research are posting in there all the time. Microsoft employees, if you're using Arduino, there's so much stuff on GitHub that has comprehensive documentation as part of it. I think, especially when we're talking about Microsoft, when a product reaches a certain maturity, when it's like ready to be on Microsoft Learn, the documentation is always great. There's really great tutorials, so you can have a dig around. Just the documentation that goes with the service is usually really helpful. I have this very specific problem of working with very new and early technologies, which are often not well documented, if even working sometimes. So also having a really strong personal network is really great. So, attending these sessions, finding out who's good to talk to in the industry is also going to really help you if you're working in those sorts of areas. So you can say, hey, am I being crazy, or is this service not working as it's supposed to? And then you can actually get to the stage where you're actually helping develop the products, especially if you're on GitHub and engaged with teams working on stuff. You can actually point out the issues and get them fixed, which is really cool as well. As learning, you can contribute to the products.
So I would suggest a bloopers tab on your blog site, Fergus, and it kind of seems like the most frequently Googled questions are error messages sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So I'm definitely gonna keep an eye on your blog for your bloopers so that you can kind of go through that early adopter phase and figure all those early adopter issues out for us.
Yeah, definitely. My blog is still very much in development compared to the likes of Veronica, but it's called Fergus's Fantastic Fixes. So it's like a space for me to try and fix these products as they come out and find the problems with them.
Yeah,
one of the questions. Oh, go ahead, Rayfield.
I was going to say one more thing I was going to add based off what Fergus said. Also, when you're looking at learning these new things, he kind of hit it on the head, right? With the emerging technology, be patient, right? And be courageous, be ready to be the first, right? Because a lot of these new technology, new applications, the way we're using it, it's not well documented, right? There's a lot of things that Fergus does that I don't know about, right? And I'm sure that everything I do, he knows. So, but the ability to be the first and be comfortable with failing up front helps learning quite a bit as well.
Yeah, sorry, I'm paying attention. I'm just keeping an eye on the chat, and we just have such interaction going on. So one of the questions that I'm seeing is, what is the difference between a thinking machine and AI?
Really, really good question. So ideally, nothing. Ideally, artificial intelligence is an all-encompassing term. The problem with the term is that, back in the day, before my time, spelling correction was deemed as artificial intelligence because it was adding a layer of intelligence to an application or a system. Now we would kind of not consider it as such, which is an interesting shift in our ideas. I think the stage that we are currently at is that people use the terms artificial intelligence quite loosely when really they're referring to quite a simple implementation of some machine learning statistics. So we then have this problem where we have to separate what we're actually talking about. So a thinking machine really is a collection of pieces of AI that work together in an orchestrated way. So the example I gave is kind of the cameras and the sensors from the robot working together in an orchestrated way. Whereas AI is really an encompassing term for that. And then we also have the idea within that of generalized or generalizable artificial intelligence, which is really kind of this next step where you have an AI that knows everything. If you were running on this robot, you could ask it any question and it would be able to use all the resources on the internet to make a logical to give a logical answer based on its understanding of the question, and it's constantly adapting and learning. Veronica quite rightly mentioned Tay, which is a perfect example of where that sort of things goes wrong, because if you open up the sort of field of data that you're using too widely, things can go quite horribly wrong, because the internet is not always a nice or safe place to exist in.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that as we increase the types of experimentation we do against our data, it's still fundamentally important to have good data. So your results are only going to be as good as your data set, right?
Absolutely, and I think another point that we sort of touched on with Veronica is that it's not good enough anymore to start with great data and then just forget about it, because we're constantly adapting, especially when we think about like thinking machines and generalizable AI and some of the more complicated aspects. We're constantly adapting the data that we're referencing, and it's always changing. So we have to make sure that it's consistently of a good enough quality to be running models off of.
So with AI systems being more prevalent kind of in the field and within industry, what are some of the methods that you're seeing that companies are using to update their data sets and to provide fresh data to their models, and to kind of refresh that learning that happens with their machine learning models?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, and I think it's probably something that not a lot of people are doing in the right way right now. So, for us at Avanade, we have a global digital ethics lead, and that's actually somebody who's going into companies all the time and kind of advising them on this sort of thing, like how to ethically handle data. There's lots of horror stories about how that's going. And it's really interesting to see companies like Microsoft developing more and more tools like every year to look at how your data is actually being handled, what machine models are actually making decisions off, so we can continue to, as we add different data sets, we can make sure that models are making fair and ethical decisions. Like the example we use is giving out credit scores on a machine learning model, making sure that new data isn't being unethical in any way. But honestly, right now, my interpretation is that that's something we have to actively monitor and actively do. Companies like Microsoft are bringing more tools online to help us do that, but it's really something that has to be quite carefully and actively monitored. And it's really a kind of security, ethics, and company reputation concern, because other people are now paying attention to what's happening to their data, what decisions are being made about their data.
Yeah, so it's definitely exciting stuff. So when you look at the AI ethics on top of, how accurate are your predictions if you're using data from, 2 to 3 years ago, when the world is changing so quickly and behavior is changing so quickly. Definitely appreciate the tools that companies like Microsoft have out there, which make it just a little bit easier for developers to fold that into your methodology for developing code and machine learning models. So
yeah, I was just going to add to what Fergus was saying. Also, it's just kind of reinforced what he was saying. It is very much necessary to have that human intervention when you're looking at the data. A good example that you kind of brought up, which isn't negative, but from a timing perspective, there was a data source that was heavily used. I don't want to name it because of the funny thing that happened. Basically, it was referring to people who were in the data repository that were no longer in the positions that they were speaking to. Let's just say that because of political scandal, it had not been checked in a very long time. And that human intervention aspect of it, right? The model itself saw it as a set of data. It saw it as something that was time specific, but didn't realize that things had matured over time, right? So that human interaction was necessary. Just wanted to add to what Fergus was saying, as well as just the way that the data was cleansed. it also referred to past tense of people's marital status, those kind of things. Again, human intervention was necessary.
Are you seeing people kind of adding more adding more tasks to projects that include AI ethics, or is there a trend moving forward about, like, are people more kind of knowledgeable of AI ethics concerns when they're dealing with their data? And do you see a trend towards, leadership? Because, as a data engineer and as a data steward, I absolutely, take responsibility for any data that I have access to. But, projects are kind of, plans with different business leaders and different executives. So are you seeing a trend in the workplace where people are putting more importance to AI ethics and clean data? And you don't have to name names.
I keep saying that as a preface to everything I say, right? That's a really good question. I would say that what we are seeing is in the trend in the past where, because AI wasn't a huge component, the data needed to be available quickly, right? And I think there's a trend moving towards the acknowledgement of the use of business applications to help manage the cleanliness of the data, right? So giving an intervention point through the use of, again, a selfless plug for Microsoft Power Platform, using that business application layer to essentially stop and review data before it makes it to its final destination, right? It does slow down the end-to-end process for the data, but it allows for them to have that business intervention before it becomes widely available on their website and says, hey, look at this out-of-date comment we're making. At least someone was able to intervene before something happened that could become a political scandal. Again, going back to scandals. Fergus, your opinion?
I think that's a really interesting way of putting it, because, when we're talking about how do we learn new skills and how do we do training, the answer is we're not afraid to fail, get stuck in. When we're talking about digital ethics and AI ethics, we are very afraid to fail. I think I would say that we are recognizing more that it's a priority for leadership within organizations to be aware of the risk, whereas before it may not have been a risk that they were thinking of, because the scandals that have occurred have caused huge reputational damage. I mean, in general, the misuse of data has collapsed companies quite famously in a certain scandal based off of a large social media platform. Simply the misuse of data has caused companies to fail. So of course it's a huge risk that we need to be aware of and constantly analyzing. And as Rayfield rightly said, at the moment that is by putting humans in the loop and making sure that things adhere to certain standards, but hopefully in the future that will be easier to do with the tools that are available and easier to monitor.
Yeah. So when you've said risk quite a few times, and I just wanted to point out to the viewers that we're not talking about like a intangible risk. We're talking about access to data, and in addition to these decisions that are being made with bias. So this is definitely something that affects everyone, and not just a small set of data. So when we talk about scandals, it sounds like it's any company who's had a data breach of their database or their web server, where we as consumers have our information within their system. So that's how widely these AI systems are integrated in with our everyday transactional systems. So I definitely agree that moving forward, this is is going to be more top of mind to people who are building these systems or interacting with these AI systems. And I'm so delighted that you both were top of mind with this when you had this discussion about digital twins and the amount of data that digital twins creates and also pulls into the machine learning model process. So that's fantastic. And I did have one more question. And again, thank you so much for the content. Every time I look over, there's another question in there. And the question is, what recent applications of either digital twins or IoT have you found to be especially innovative? And I'd like to add on to that, was there any application that you found surprising? Like, oh, I didn't think that would be a use.
I was on mute. Sorry about that. You mean other than what Fergus explained to us earlier? I mean, that's probably the top of mind for me. Outside of that, I probably would say in the last year or so, and Fergus, you might have your own opinion on this one. I probably would say that the use of IoT for smart inventory management systems. So again, I know I keep focusing on healthcare and hospitals, but the use of smart inventory management systems essentially to determine the shelf life of time-sensitive medicines and ensuring that not only it isn't a impact to the consumer, the patient, but also ensuring that there isn't a huge loss from hospitals because of the shelf life not being recognized and not being utilized the right way. So I think that's extremely innovative in thinking beyond the fact that, hey, we have medicine. We usually, give this medicine out, but there is a shelf life. Again, not to get too specific around what's going on now, but in cases like COVID, right? Having a timeliness around the vaccines, a timeliness around the medicines, a timeliness around things that are being used to prevent advanced stages of COVID and other diseases is very impactful, right? So it means the difference between again someone being able to come home and not being able to come home based off of the right medicine provided in the right amount of time. Does that help, Fergus?
Yeah, so I guess the follow-up question for Fergus would be, what would be kind of the funnest non-commercial use case that you could, because sometimes you think, oh, I just wish I had a thing that would do that, like find my remote when I'm looking for it, and so I know you have a frivolous use case that you've sat and thought about, and wouldn't it be cool if?
Well, I think, again, not to get too specific to COVID, but we've done some, what I talked about last time with the using AI to create virtual spaces, creating a digital twin of your life, where your car is parked, where your keys are, and being able to invite others to your space virtually so they can walk around your room and, exist in your, come watch TV with you in a digital twin of your life. That would be, kind of cool. Have the robot, other people being able to drive it remotely through the digital twin, having all that data updated live, hopefully not spy on you, which is a possibility, I guess, with talk about ethics and security. But I think there's so many cool different scenarios. I was really interested, for example, by Rayfield's example of like a farm use case of like a digital twin of a farm, and like looking at how things are being produced. I have in the wild north of England have a family farm that we've long kind of joked about implementing some technology in, because there's really specific challenges in agriculture, like how remote you are, your data connectivity, connection to power, but really useful things to monitor, like productivity, disease, and some really cool tools you can use to do that, like IoT sensors, digital twins, drones, so like flying robots that are mapping out crop fields. So I think, that is a commercial use case, but I think that's a really awesome one as well. To kind of think about. And I think, as more and more technology comes online, it's also becoming like a reality, like Apple AirTags, right? You can find your devices wherever they are now using your phone. So like slowly more and more things are becoming digital. There's sensors and everything, there's microchips and everything. And at some point we're going to need to conglomerate all of those different devices, all that different data in some like easy to use way that's going to be helpful for your life as well as commercial. So it's kind of like smart home 2.0.
Yeah, I didn't realize. I was gonna say, Alicia, I didn't realize we had frivolous, because I would definitely set up something in my house to monitor my kids accessing my comic books. They have a tendency to think comic books are something to play with, but they're actually something important to me, and I don't like finding pieces of them everywhere in the house. So definitely would use it that way.
So you're saying not just the remote, like the remote battery cover, the batteries in the remote.
Yep, exactly.
So that is fantastic, and that's exactly why I asked the question. It's it's so interesting to see the frivolous little niceties that we can create inside our heads to make our lives a little bit easier, right? And Fergus, definitely thank you for letting us inside your head. You continue to amaze me with all the forward thinking that you have with the projects you work on, and you're such a bright light in the industry. So I'm definitely going to continue to follow you and send across your updated blog information when it's available, and we're happy to share it with you. And I think the next time we have you on, if you could bring Rory and maybe a surfer accent, I don't know if that's asking too much, but I think that would be the most entertaining. And Rayfield, definitely, this is your first time being on one of the global AI community streams, and it's so nice to have that other perspective. And because sometimes we see these technologies and we do ask ourselves, is this something that I want to spend the time, or at this point in my career, getting up to speed on? And it's just so truly valuable to have an industry leader like you around, where we can bounce ideas off of, and you can let us know that, yes, this has legs, or maybe your time would be better spent on an alternative technology. Yeah. So I definitely appreciate the two of you for coming and spending this evening with me on Global AI Tour for Houston edition.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next up, we're going to spend a little bit of time with Ron Dagdag, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about developing your Spidey senses. Ron is going to talk us through an implementation with